All right, welcome back. So we're going to move on to our next two major systems, and they're grouped together because they work together a lot. So this is the circulatory and respiratory system. And I love this cartoon because it does pretty much describe what goes on, especially with New Year's coming up later on. People are like, I need to get back to the gym. I just remember talking to my family. They're like, I got to lose my COVID-20. Actually, I didn't gain any. Working from home has been quite good for me because I actually get to go out and do those nice long walks during the afternoon. But you hear that thing, your brain's like, okay, ready to get back in shape, and you're all ready for it. And then you start going, and next thing your lungs are gone, and your muscles hate you. And then your heart's just like, oh my gosh, this is everyone in early January. It'll be interesting to see what happens since we're in the middle of a pandemic still and cases are rising like crazy. But let's get into the different parts. And we're going to start with the respiratory system. So the process of respiration is pretty much the gas exchange between the blood and the external environment. So you think about it, the whole process of cellular respiration going back to haunt you. But remember, you take in oxygen, all right? That's one of the inputs of the whole equation. And then what your body does is it converts it into carbon dioxide. Now, we do this process in order to generate ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. Now, we need to get rid of that waste product, which is carbon dioxide. If you have an excess of carbon dioxide, levels rise in your blood and it can be bad. So we need to get rid of it. So the process we do, this process of breathing. Now you do approximately about 15 breaths per minute, 900 per hour, about 21,000 per day, which is quite fascinating when you think about it because you're not really thinking about it. You just do it. Now it can be both voluntary and involuntary. So you can hold your breath to a point. It's always a fun thing to do with little kids and see who can do it the longest, especially to kind of trick them, puff out your cheeks and think that you're not breathing, but actually breathe through your nose. But eventually your excess CO2 starts to build up in your blood. And what that does is it triggers your respiratory center in the brain and it causes you to get rid of it. It's like, whew, okay, breathe, breathe, breathe. I let it out. So you can regulate it some. What amazes me, those people do that really, those deep free dives, they have it figured out. They know how to kind of override that system, which is quite fascinating. I love to watch those kind of things about when people are able to do weird things like that. So your respiratory tract is kind of broken up into two big parts. You have your upper tract and your lower tract. So your respiratory system is pretty much your pathway to and from the lungs. Now your nose is going to do a lot of the filtering. So this is an example of seeing it inside of your nasal cavity, and it's going to filter a lot of dirt and bacteria from your lungs. Like I said, I have a heavy ag background, and I could tell sometimes when I'd work outside a lot, you blow your nose, and it's just disgusting to see what's going there. But I'm glad that's all being caught instead of it going into my lungs. Now, it's also going to warm and humidify the air as it travels to your lungs, and that does help with the gas exchange. Now, the tract is going to be coated with mucus, and that's going to help seal the tissues from the direct contact with air because you don't want them drying out. Now, within your nasal cavity, you're going to have these narrow canals in your nose, and that's for inhaling the air. And its access also drains excess tear production to your nostrils. Now, you're going to have the sinuses, boom, 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 which are air-filled chambers in your skull. So remember, think about sinus infections. That's what happens when those start to get filled with fluid. And they can be quite painful. You can have some buildup there and just leads to overall headaches. Now you're also going to have your pharynx, which is going to connect your nasal cavities to your larynx. Boom, boom, boom. And it's kind of broken up into smaller parts on this compared to what's in your book. And it's also going to have your tonsils that are going to provide immune protection. And then sometimes these overreact, so sometimes people have to have those tonsils removed. Now the epiglottis, boom, right there is that flap that blocks the airway while swallowing. So remember, you want the food and water to go down the esophagus into the stomach and not into your lungs. We don't want to drown. And then finally the larynx, which is your voice box where your vocal cords are located. Now the lower tract is where we're going to take the trachea. All right, so go down the larynx, down to the trachea. Call it your windpipe. It's a tube connecting your larynx to your lungs. So it's held open by these cartilage rings. So go back to that cartoon on the last one. You can see those kind of rings on it. Now, once we get into the lungs, we're going to split it into what we call bronchi. And it's going to split into a left and a right one. Now, you've heard the term bronchitis. I'm pretty sure I've had it a few times. And this is when your bronchi get infected. It can be acute, or forgot what the other way off the top of my head. I'll admit it, I'm not an anatomy and physiology teacher. I've taken physiology in one course in college, never took anatomy. I know. You're quite amazed by that? I am too. So this is a good video that talks about bronchitis because I'm pretty sure we've all dealt with this. Now your bronchi are then going to keep going into smaller and smaller passages. The next up is the bronchiole. So these are smaller passages. Boom, boom. And then we're going to go through and we're going to keep going until we get to the smallest of them, where we call our alveoli. So these are going to be little air sacs inside the lung, and this is where the site of gas exchange happens. And these are surrounded by capillaries. So this is where that CO2 leaves, and the oxygen goes in. This is where we're going to do that exchange. Now, a few things. I talked about bronchitis. So this is when your bronchi get inflamed. Asthma is another condition where the bronchioles contract during attack. So these people have a hard time breathing. And it can happen to where they don't expand. So it feels like they're kind of suffocating because it's conditions where they kind of won't release. And it can be quite painful. So we'll go through the surfactant role. So think about, the whole process of how everything goes. So you inhale. What's happening is oxygen's hitting your oral and your nasal cavity. So you can breathe through your mouth, both your mouth and your nose. It's going to go down your pharynx, down your larynx, into your trachea, then into the bronchi, and then to the primary bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, and then the alveoli. Now this is just kind of going through the process of everything goes through. So remember, the oxygen we need to get into the blood system, and we need to get rid of the carbon dioxide out. Right? So that's the goal. So the blood is coming from all over the body. It's going to enter these alveoli, and what's going to happen as it's going through the capillary right here, the carbon dioxide's leaving. We get to a certain point, now the oxygen's going to go in. Now, within that, we need to keep this surface moist within so we can allow this diffusion to occur. Now, with one of those qualities of water, it has that high surface tension, so molecules are attracted to each other. Now, it's great because it helps with the surface tension, and it helps with this process of gas exchange. Now, to help with this, reduce some of the surface tension of water so the alveoli don't collapse for certain reasons, we have this pulmonary surfactant. Now, the surfactant is actually composed of lipids and proteins, phospholipids, and you have some of your alveolar cells that actually produce the surfactant. So that in combination of water is super important. Now, the cells that actually produce the surfactant are developed late in fetal development, and that's why you probably see a lot of problems with breathing with premature births, because you don't have the cells that produce the surfactants. So that's the respiratory. So let's talk about the circulatory a little bit. So we need to transport nutrients to and remove waste products from the cells. Things we're moving: nutrients, gases, waste, hormones, cell signaling molecules. We have to get this all throughout the body. So remember, the lungs is where we're doing the gas exchange. Goes into our circulatory system. Now, the circulatory system goes all throughout the body, and it has roles in both communication, thermoregulation, repairing injuries, and disabling invaders. There's just so much that happens in your circulatory system. Now, we're going to break it up into major parts. You're going to have the circulatory fluid, and then you're going to have the vascular system of vessels to carry it around, and then the pump. So think of your fluid as your blood. Your vascular system is your veins and arteries, and the pump that's regulating it all, it's the heart. Now, the reason this is all important is that we got to work together. So that's why they put the circulatory and respiratory together, because we have to get the waste in and out. And sometimes you'll actually see the urinary system associated with this too sometimes. Now, we have what's called a closed system. So I might have mentioned the open circulatory system when I talked about insects before, but this is where they have this open system. It's incomplete, not like a closed network. And they have this fluid called hemolymph, and what it does is it leaves it in space cells, all the cells, all the different organs and stuff, and then it collects at a certain point and goes back to the heart. With this system, you have very low blood pressure, but it's ideal for animals with low metabolism. We fall into the category where we have a closed circulatory system. So we have this series of networks, and it's never going to completely leave the network. It's always going to be in there. Now, with that, we do have a higher blood pressure and is a lot more efficient. So think about, we have the capillaries where we do the gas exchange. Now, once the carbon dioxide leaves and we exchange it for oxygen, leaves and goes into the heart, and then the aorta pours it out. We go to all the arteries, arterioles, to all the different areas of the body, some more capillaries. We do that exchange again. Now we need to go through, take our capillaries into the venules, to the veins, and then back to the heart, and then pump that back to the lung, and the exchange happens again. So it's a closed loop where it never leaves the circuit. So here's the order. We're going to go from the arteries to the arterioles to the capillaries, where it's small. This is where the magic gas exchange is going to happen. The venules, and then to the veins, and then eventually we're always getting back to the heart. Now the capillaries, as I mentioned, this is fine webbing, very, very, very thin. So we need to keep this very thin so we can have cells so small that they can pass through single file. This is where we're going to have that nutrient exchange happen. It's super important. So when you have damage to the capillaries, that's where you're going to have problems with the exchange of the waste and then the input of the actual nutrients you want. Now, arteries are going to take blood away from the heart, so they're going to be very elastic when it comes to the walls. Your veins are bringing the blood-rich in CO2 back to the heart. They're not going to be as thick-walled as arteries, and we do have valves throughout the system to prevent backflow, which is super, super important. So there is one lab that you do. It's a virtual lab. It's actually kind of cool because it goes through the process of looking at the cardiac cycle. And don't be afraid if you are confused about that, because you actually get to look at like normal heart rate versus abnormal heart rate and see if you can come up with the condition. It's okay if you don't get the right condition. I didn't get half of them right, but I want you to go through the process. It's kind of cool. That's why I'm not a cardiologist. I'm not that kind of doctor, not a medical doctor. I'm just a doctor that knows a lot about facts and stuff, so as my mother calls it. So let's talk about the heart in a little bit more detail. It's very asymmetrical in shape, and if you like make a fist, it's about that size right there. Now there are 4 chambers. You have 2 atrium, and this is where we're going to receive blood. And then you have your 2 ventricles, which are your lower parts. It's going to pump the blood out of the heart. Now in between them, there's a septum, and it separates into the left and right regions. So as we don't want to mix the oxygenated with the deoxygenated blood, okay? So goal is to get the blood that has no oxygen in it, all the carbon dioxide to the lungs so we can exchange it, and all the blood that just came from the lungs that has all that rich oxygen, we need to get it out to the rest of the body. So we need to make sure that we get it to the right location, but also we have these valves. We want to make sure there are no backflow. So that's why you have these one-way valves between each of the different chambers. Now you also have all kinds of different channels and stuff going on. You're going to have your superior and inferior vena cava that are going to return deoxygenated blood from the body to the right atrium. Boom, boom, boom. Right there. Boom, right here. Here we go. Now they do a good job. I like on the book they color code it. So if it's deoxygenated coming from the body with all that carbon dioxide, you're going to think blue. Oxygenated, which is good, you're going to kind of see it as red. Now, blood's going to pass through this AV tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Boom, right there. We cleft right here. And then it's going to pump to the lungs via the pulmonary arteries. Boom, right here. So it's going to go left or right, depending if it's which lung it's going to. And then we're going to take and complete the pulmonary circuit. The veins are going to go through and carry the oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Boom, boom, boom. So this is after we come all the way from right here, and we're going to enter into right here. I know this is kind of hard. There's a good video later on that kind of brings you through step by step. And then we'll go into this left ventricle via that bicuspid valve. And then that is going to be pumped out through the body via the aorta. So if you ever watch all those medical shows, the aorta is super critical. You know, if you have any part of the heart that's damaged, it's super bad. I swear, I love those medical dramas. But we'll talk about circulatory problems a little bit later. So the cardiac cycle, as I mentioned, there's going to be a lab that's going to kind of go you through the different parts. But heartbeats have 3 different parts. You're going to have the part where the atria contract. Then you're going to have part where the ventricles contract, and then a part where they're both resting. So you'll hear the term systole and diastole. Diastole happened before. The systole is the contraction, and the relaxation part is the diastole right here. So that lub-dub sound is because when you hear the different valves closing. Now, one way that you could go through that is via the electrocardiogram with the ECG, and that help that does is it measures the different pulses. I had to go for a yearly checkup in a few days, and I'm actually on blood pressure medicine. I'm only just turned 40, and it's one of the things I have to deal with. But it's kind of interesting because I actually get to watch them go through all this, and I actually have them explain to me all the different parts. And when you do the virtual lab, they actually go through and talk about it a little bit more. So don't feel sad if you're still confused. Like I said, there's review videos. I didn't want to go too much detail because I know you have a short attention span when it comes to listening to these videos. So we talked about the artery system, the veins, and then the pump. The last part was a component was the blood. Now, when you think of your blood, there's a lot of stuff in it. And we're going to talk about, you know, your white blood cells a lot in the immune system lecture. But basically, your blood has composed of plasma. It's about 90% water, 8% protein, some other nutrients and salts and everything. But then you have your red blood cells, which are called your erythrocytes, and then your white blood cells. Now, your red blood cells are what we're going to use to transport oxygen via hemoglobin. Now, these are going to be super important, and this is why you have to make sure you've heard of bone marrow transplants. People that have a problem with not making their own red blood cells have to get a transplant. And what's interesting is they only have a life of about 3 months, so you're constantly producing new erythrocytes. Now, your leukocytes, these are super important for when it comes to infection. And when, like I said, when we hit the immune system, we are going to go over this. They are super important for your inflammatory response. And it's going to be important for getting the right type of cells to go through and battle anything. And if you've ever had an infection, you know, think about pus, that is a bunch of dead white blood cells after infection. That means they're doing their job. Sometimes, you know, if you can get to the point where it's too bad, but that's what is an indication that your white blood cells have been there. Now, within there, you also have platelets, which are called thrombocytes, and these help with blood clotting or coagulation, and it helps to stop bleeding. And pretty much the job of the platelets is to pretty much plug the leak in the vessel. Now, once the clot is assembled, then we can go through and start the healing. So people that suffer hemophilia cannot produce these clotting factors, so they will continue to bleed. So even small little scrapes and stuff can be quite dangerous for them. So with this, there's problems that happen in every system, and cardiovascular disorders is a leading cause of death in Western countries because we just love our horrible food. I swear, our portion sizes are out of control, and we just love to deep fry everything. Now, some different conditions, you have hypertension, high blood pressure. As I mentioned, I was in the normal range this last time, and hopefully this coming week I will be too. But high blood pressure can lead to stroke or a heart attack. Now, this can be genetic or affected by your diet, smoking, or lack of exercise. I don't know why I'm on it. My husband's on it too, and he's skinny, so it's just weird. My dog is on blood pressure medicine. Oh my gosh, this whole house. I don't know. Maybe it's something we're eating or drinking here. It's the water. Now, you can have where you have accumulation of cholesterol in your arteries, and what that does is it does go through and clog things. And this can be typically show up around your middle age, osteosclerosis. Might have said that wrong. So this is why when they get older, they start looking at your cholesterol levels, which can be quite scary. Now, stroke is what happens when an artery in the brain bus starts blocked by embolus or clot. And what that happens is you have a lack of oxygen to the brain, and it can lead to death. Now, a heart attack is when we start to have death of some of the heart muscle. So there's different things that can cause it, cause and other stuff, but basically when we start to lose the function of the heart muscle, things just go down cells, because if you don't have the pump, you cannot get things throughout the body. Now, we can treat problems surgically. You've heard of all these different things. Like I said, I'm a big medical drama fan. Coronary bypasses is one example, the balloon angioplasty. So there's all kinds of different ways that they can go through and try to keep these vessels open. So this is a video that kind of talks about these circulatory problems. I think it talks about what happens when you have a heart attack and a stroke, and it's kind of interesting to see. So as I mentioned, here's some review videos. If anything is confusing, like I said, I didn't go into super detail about the parts of the cardiac cycle. One of these has a lot more details. I forgot which one exactly, but you're going to do a virtual lab. It'll be kind of fun, and hopefully you enjoy it. That will make a little more sense. And then credit to my images.